Let's now have a look at the anger that makes the Ukrainians defend themselves in such an amazing way. Of course, this anger will have also exaggerations, and it has had exaggerations. But let's first understand the anger of the Ukrainians. You see, already since a very long time, the Russians have denied that there is such a thing as Ukraine. It is as if Ukraine does not exist. So if it does not exist, it doesn't have the right to exist and can be treated according to the whims of the center of the empire. And this is very old. And when the Bolshevik Revolution took over the empire of the Tsars, you could guess in advance, if you knew their atheist ideology, that it would turn sour very quickly, because their universal form of socialism denied that there was such a thing as peoples and nations whatsoever. Humanity must be united by one single universal vision. So the Ukrainians fell victim to something that we cannot possibly imagine. A civil war with mass starvation, and also political measures aiming directly at mass starvation, both in the 20s, beginning of the 20s, and again in the beginning of the 30s. Many millions were starved to death in the Ukraine. Because they have no right to exist, because they do not really exist. In the 20s during the Civil War, in the 30s, beginning of the 30s, because of this so-called collectivization of agriculture. You can all find that. I'm not going to tell you the whole history. You can all look it up yourselves. Millions of people disappeared. And of course, the empty places were filled with immigrants, non-Ukrainians. But that there was a certain spirit of revenge that was the consequence of that. That's not surprising, that's only natural. And as a stark reminder, I could show you many pictures, just to keep that in mind. What was in the eyes of people who later on wanted to take revenge. I could show you many pictures, and there are many horrible pictures. I just want to show you this one single picture, which I find the most impressive. It's a boy called Hilarion. He is 11 years old. And just look at him and realize that this boy had just killed and eaten his 3-year-old brother. Are you surprised that 20 years later, Hilarion, if he was still alive, or his friends, his compatriots, welcomed the Germans as liberators? Are you surprised? After a waves of purges and starvation campaigns, that you consider the Germans who are new, whom you do not know, that you consider them as your friends who come to liberate you. No one should judge the Ukrainians for having welcomed the Germans, the Nazis, if you like. And of course, the Nazis, as all totalitarian systems, they immediately pick out the psychopaths and let them do the dirty job. And that's why some Ukrainians were terrible butchers in the concentration camps and helped killing Jews. That's the normal recipe of a totalitarian society. It is also not surprising that many Ukrainians, young guys who were healthy, who saw a little sign of hope in the coming of the Germans, joined the SS to go and fight the communists. What did they know about the rest of what was happening in Europe? Well, they got to know it. They were not sent to Moscow, these SS troops, but they were sent to France. And surprise, surprise, the SS discipline and the Nazi ideology was apparently not very deeply rooted in these guys. Because once they were in France, they killed their German SS officers and joined the French resistance, which was maybe not dominated by the left, but the left played a very important role, the communists and the socialists. They were very strong in this French resistance against the Nazi occupier. These Ukrainian guys were SS, but they helped liberate France from the Nazis. Very confusing anger. Very confusing will to fight, isn't it, for us simplistic Westerners who think that Hitler is the only source of evil? Anyway, that there is some Nazi fascination in some parts of the Ukrainian youth, that's hardly surprising. And it's probably a problem to deal with, and I hope it is dealt with, but nothing justifies the absurd motivation by the Slavo-fascist Czechists now attacking the Ukraine. Nothing justifies this attack, and certainly not this absurd motivation of denazification. Let Moscow first abolish their own special services before they start cleaning up somebody else's house. So the anger of the Ukrainians is understandable. They want to live in their own land. They'll have their problems and they'll need help to solve them. So far, many Christian churches in the Ukraine have lived in peace and want to live in peace. And this country that needs to be denazified, it's very strange, but it has a Jewish president. Ukraine has its own problems, but it doesn't need the Slavo-fascists of Lubyanka to solve them. It tells us something about the right to live on your own ground and the God-given duty to live in the land God has given to you and let your life bear fruit. A priest should always help a soul to search the cause of its sadness and the causes of its anger, because there you find the thirst of truth. thirst of justice. And you find also the justice that the soul wants to labor for, to fight for, to sacrifice for. And that's the noblest potential within every soul, because God has given it. The potential, the capacity to live in truth.